Hello, and welcome everybody to the Altering, Shifting, Communing Conversation series presented by Call for Curators. I am Ilaria Conti, the curator of the series, and I'm here with Patricio Majano. Hola, Patricio. Thank you very much for being here today. As many of you already know, this talk is part of a series presented every Tuesday at this time, 6:30 p.m. Central European Time. And it is a series that started little over a month ago now to carve out a weekly space to reconsider curatorship in communal terms, to also reflect on how we develop our work critically and politically, and discuss sustainable practices. And by sustainable, I, of course, do not mean only in financial terms. So what we're trying to do is to really bring forward not only interesting topics, but also helpful ideas, tools, and strategies, and also amplify the work of others through the speakers invited. So we will have approximately a 40-minute conversation with Patricio. In the meantime, feel free to ask any questions through the comment section. And also, as usual, I encourage everybody to connect with each other through the comment section, but also with us to share ideas or comments. And here is our email address. And so I will gather the questions for Patricio and then field them toward the end of the conversation. But now I see that people are starting to come in and connect, as we always start very much on time. So let's jump right in and introduce Patricio, who is a Salvadoran curator, artist, and professor. He's the curator and interim director of Y.ES Contemporary, and he's also professor at the School of Arts of the University of El Salvador. So hi, Patricio. Thank you so much again for being with us today. So usually we just get started in a very informal way, so feel free to introduce yourself in your own words. Tell us where you are, how you have been, if you want, especially because, as we all know, these past months have been very complex and challenging for all of us internationally. So just we would love to hear from you about what is going on, how you are, and also what is the current situation in El Salvador.
Hi, Ilaria, and hi, everyone, and thanks for having me here. I'm very happy to be here. And well, as Ilaria said, I am Patricio, and I'm a curator and artist. I started as an artist, actually, and then moved towards curatorial practice. These couple of months, I've been working mainly with Y.ES and with the university, mostly with Y.ES. And everything online. That's a good thing that Y.ES has. We worked mostly online. And in El Salvador, the situation has been hard, as in many places, not only because of the pandemic, but because of the political situation. There are some things that worry. Worry a lot of people. The situation, the politics here. And I hope I've seen also a lot of people helping, which is also good. And I will talk about this later, because the art community has also come together to help each other and help others. And overall, it's been challenging, but I think all the people just keeps going. And yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, we were talking a little bit prior to the beginning of the event of how somehow the situation is still challenging. There's still a partial lockdown. So I guess we will get to it as we talk about everything about your practice and what is going on in El Salvador. So you mentioned Y.ES Contemporary, and I'm going to share here the link for those who are not familiar with the organization. So let's get started from there somehow. If you can tell us a little bit about what it is exactly and how and when it started.
Y.ES Contemporary is a part of the Robert Wennett and Mario Caderfrech Foundation. It was founded by them. Mario Caderfrech is a Salvadorian that lives in Miami. And it started because he noticed that there was a and there is a very interesting art scene in El Salvador, but they were not getting too many opportunities internationally. There was a underrepresentation of Salvadorian artists in the main um, art scenes. So he started working many years ago, and he supported first the Museum of Art in El Salvador, Marte. And 5 years ago, he founded Y.ES Contemporary. Um, and Y.ES Contemporary focuses in providing opportunities for Salvadorian artists in El Salvador and abroad, because a lot of Salvadorians live outside El Salvador. Approximately 1/4 of Salvadorians lives outside, so there's a lot of migration. And what we try to do is provide opportunities, but also um, do the things that nobody else is doing, and complement and collaborate with other institutions. Um, it is a non-collective nomadic program, so that also allows us to work. We work a lot of our program is online, which has been very helpful in these times because we didn't have to cut everything. And some of our programs were physical, but we have paused that, or we left them. We leave them for when times get better.
Mhm.
Um, and we have a lot of programs that we get to them in a moment. But basically, is that it's a very recent program, but I think it has had a lot of impact in El Salvador.
Thank you, Patricia. And we'll get to that also in a moment. So just to delve a bit sort of deeper into the activities, no, of Y.ES Contemporary, I think it's interesting also to take a step back. As we were saying before, there might be a few people that are watching this that might not be familiar really with the contemporary art scene in El Salvador. So I thought it was interesting to ask you if you could tell us a little bit about the artistic landscape in El Salvador when Y.ES started, and particularly whether you can tell us, you were talking about the fact that Salvadoran art didn't have a lot of international exposure, but also I wanted to know, in your opinion, what were the key challenges where you guys started, both from a financial, but also political, social, cultural, educational standpoint. So what was really the spectrum, the landscape in which this initiative started in El Salvador, and so what were these challenges that you found in front of yourself when you started this initiative, when you were working first with Y.ES Contemporary, and how you've been addressing them? So somehow, what were the urgencies there, and how you set yourself, to respond to these? So what was the vision somehow through which you addressed them?
Mhm. So in El Salvador, I have to mention as well that in the 80s, there was a big war here, and the post-war period was also very is also very challenging, um, because it's something that uh, is still i- is still affecting the society.
Mhm.
Contemporary art here started developing mostly in this century, or in late 90s,
Mhm.
and the artists here were very influenced by modernism. But in the 2000s, a lot of contemporary artists started working, and they have a very good work. Um, and a lot of them were making exhibitions and making projects outside El Salvador, but there was still that underrepresentation outside. So Y.ES started, like I said, 5 years ago, and it was also a moment where there were not many spaces dedicated to art. There were a few, um, but there were just not that many, and that has changed since I
Yes.
feel. For example, only last year, I think, or 2 years ago, started a lot of galleries and a lot of projects, independent projects
Mhm.
that are really interesting. Artists as well has been getting out more and more. Are They are making projects they are making exhibitions that are really important. So I think it's something that has been changing.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel also that uh, this has somehow stopped in some aspects because of the pandemic. But I hope after this keeps uh, things keep getting better.
Yeah.
And I think since 5 years ago is not a big time, most of this was very similar, but a lot has changed. Um, we also share a lot of things with Latin America, I think. For example, as I mentioned, there were only a few galleries. Um, the art market here in Central America is not that developed as in other places. There are not too many collectors, for example. Um, there's only one university and one art career in the whole country, so that's a problem, I think. And it isn't that university has been criticized very often, but I think it's also a good meeting point for all the people interested in arts. And I think also the artist as a professional, uh, or for an artist to be a professional and to live, to make a living from this is kind of hard or takes time. But I think it's something that not necessarily is specific of the arts or specific of El Salvador, but it's definitely something that a lot of people feel, I think. And Jess has been trying to collaborate to provide these opportunities. Um, we we try to do what other people is not doing in order to uh, complement
Mhm.
what's already happening, which I think it's very important because we are a limited program, and I think as well no program should be like a whole, like a
Mhm.
unique good thing. Um, I think it's better when there are many other programs, institutions, independent projects collaborating. I think it's healthier for the art scene. Anyway, I think that approach has helped us because, for example, we a few years ago there were not too many curators, or the curators that were working as a curators they work mainly as something else.
Mhm.
For example, artist Simon Vega has curated a lot of projects, and there are very interesting projects, but he is mainly an artist.
Mhm.
He curated the exhibition that is on view at the Museum of Art of El Salvador, called Donde Hubo Fuego. That is the first exhibition of contemporary art, uh, semi-permanent exhibition of contemporary art in the museum. um, but his work has been mainly as an artist.
Mhm.
And like him, most of the curators uh, make curatorial practice as a I don't know, as a secondary thing.
Yes.
Although there has been many good projects, um, and we noticed that, and we did 2 years ago curatorial symposium. We had a talk, and it was a 3-day symposium that we address some of the main topics or themes related to curatorial practice. And since then, I have seen a lot of people, mostly young people, interested in curatorial projects. So it's something that is recent, but I think it's changing the environment here. The same with writers. We also have We also focus in writing, arts writing. Um, and we started with a writer's grant that it is a partnership between publisher and Y.ES. This year is hyperallergic,
Mhm.
and we offered this grant for a person to write about El Salvador. And I think it's been 4 years now of this grant, and this year we had a lot of applications. I think it was a record of applications that we had, and it's good to see so many people interested in writing about the country and the art scene here. And the winner, Annette Lin, she chose a very interesting topic. She's going to write about queer female artists in the diaspora that through their work are challenging notions of El Salvador that are presented in the media. So I think it's a very interesting approach to Salvadoran art, and definitely a theme that is very timely and very necessary to address. Um, we also did a writer symposium last year. We invited we do that with we did that along with our art trips. So we had people from other places collaborating. We have Brian Barcena from the Museum of Contemporary Art in LA. We had Alexia Tala, and we had Gabriela Poma, who is a Salvadorian sitting in Harvard,
Mhm.
and she directed. She's also part of our council of Yes uh, council, and she was very helpful. She directed the whole process, and this at the end we published 3 articles by 3 writers from
Mhm.
El Salvador. Um, those are in our website, and this week we are going to publish the last one. The first one is from Dalia Chavez. She addresses how museums can change in this moment, and develops the idea of a museum that adapts instead of instead of uh, copying the traditional idea of a museum. Then we have Eduardo Crespin, who wrote about uh, locality, and about how Salvadorian artists are not, or some Salvadorian artists are not imitating what is mainstream in other places, like mainly United States and Europe,
Mhm.
but are making work that relates to their region. Um, and the last one is Jaime Izaguirre, which is mostly an historical point of view, but that talks about indigenous representations through painting, and how that is a construction, and how the images of the indigenous people that we see in painting are close or not close to the reality in the last century. So I think it's very interesting. I think that those 2 examples, writing and curating, I think that those are good examples to see how Jess is providing opportunities, and trying to do stuff that other people is not doing, or that we see that we can more could be done in
Yes.
those aspects.
That's super interesting because so just I wanted to touch upon a few things that you said, just to like this idea of working through specificities rather than doing what everybody else is doing and kind of copying an international model. It's something very, very important and interesting that we're trying always to kind of discuss in every single talk, and we'll talk more about this as we talk about the other programs that you just briefly mentioned and that Y.ES is developing, so as we delve deeper. But I think it's very, very interesting, and it would be great to kind of hear more about really working through the specificities and also the radicality that specificity has versus just copying this internationalist fake universalist model of whatever contemporary art can mean, in that sense, which I think is very, very interesting. I also encourage everybody to, of course, here you can see the Y.ES Contemporary website, but online, as Patricio was saying, you can find more information about the writer grants. It was announced only a few days ago. So you will find it on Y.ES Contemporary, on a hyperallergic. And as Patricio was saying, it's a truly interesting topic. And the winner is a professional journalist. So it's going to be a very interesting articulation of the topic, I think. And same for the text. I've enjoyed them very much. And what I also enjoyed very much is that they came to my inbox. They were part of your newsletter. So somehow, even when one would forget that this project was still going on and these texts were produced and circulated, it was great to kind of have that in-depth access to them right away. And then you mentioned some of sort of curator or professional figures, including Alexi Miranda, who's the curator of the next PAIS Biennial in Guatemala. And we will talk also in a minute about sort of interregional connections, so how from El Salvador you're also reaching out to many other contexts and regions. So if you want, Patricio, we can delve deeper. I can start. You had prepared for us some images to share, and we can talk again, as you were saying, more about how Y.ES operates. So important thing that you said before that it's good to repeat for those who might have come in a bit later. Y.ES does not have a space. So it's an itinerant, non-collecting space. You do a lot of work online, of course. So you were also working already pre-COVID with a lot of the ideas and necessities that now we have to cope with. And I think it would be great to hear more about that. And we can talk about some of the key projects, the key strategies. You were talking about the specificities of the local scene. And now this was addressed. So let me get the images that we had prepared. Here we go. You should be able to see them in a moment. Here we go. Share. I hope you can all visualize it correctly. Yes? Okay. Wonderful. You tell me when I need to move forward, but you can guide us through some of these images, I guess.
So this is an image for Y.ES Art Trip, for a Y.ES Art Trip. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the only programs that we had to cancel because it is obviously a physical program. And what we do is bring curators and professionals that are already working in projects related to El Salvador or to Central America or to the region. And we connect them to the national art scene. So we take them to visit art studios, the museums and galleries here. So this is a more descriptive image. Here they are visiting, this was last year, and they are visiting Walterio Iraeta and Abigail Reyes' studio. And it is basically this. Sometimes they are already interested in a specific artist, and they come to know more about their work. Mm-hmm. For example, here, this from this art trip, we had Natasha Egan from the Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago, and she was interested in an artist called Orlando Villatoro, that he works with digital art mostly, and she was at the time she was curating an exhibition that was on view at the end of last year in the museum, and she got to know more about his work, got to talk with him personally. So we try to do that. We try to choose very carefully the people that we are inviting, so we can provide the best opportunity for projects to come up from this art trip. I don't remember what's the next image.
Oh, let's have a look.
Yeah. So this one is from the Artist Academy. This was specifically the curatorial, the talk about curatorial practice. And here we have Pablo Jose Ramirez, Javier Ramirez, Nadie, which is one of the artists that has also uh, work in curatorial projects, very interesting curatorial projects. We have Jocelyn Pinto, a Guatemalan curator, also making great stuff in Guatemala. And Claire Bruckel, who was the director and curator of Y.ES Contemporary. And this is something I have to mention as well, because as the pandemic started, we shifted, um, uh, we changed the directors, and I started working as a director, but most and many things of the program and the approach of the program was Claire's vision as well. I've learned a lot from her. And in this talk, we collaborated. For example, here we did this in the Cultural Center of Spain in El Salvador. That is also an institution that we collaborate a lot with, and we had a lot of people interested in curatorial practice. Obviously, talks is something that we can do online as well. So at the moment, we are trying to adapt to this situation, and we are planning what makes sense for 2020. But this is also another of our programs, and this was a talk that was related as well to the Artist Academy. We do one each year, and the Artist Academy is kind of for educational program, um, and there were those two that I mentioned about curatorial practice and about arts writing, but we had others before focusing the professionalization of an artist. So the next image is yeah, this is this is an independent project. This is not Yes, but it's also a project that I wanted to include because I think it highlights how collaboration works, and here in El Salvador, and how collaboration is a very important tool when we have a lack of other stuff. Like I mentioned before, we had some conditions that might not be ideal, but through collaboration, I think some interesting projects can come up. So this was an exhibition called Base Ocho, that was in collaboration with La Única Gallery. They are directed by Javier Ramirez Nadi and by Caroline Lacey. And it is located currently in San Salvador downtown. And this exhibition tried to reflect on the position of a young artist, or an art student, or an emerging artist, and what that means, and how that position has been utilized for by some artists to create artwork. So this is Miguel Rubio, and this was a performance that was made in the front part of the building. There is a plaza. Um, so what he did was he brought paintings and drawings that were not meant to be in this performance. They were done before, just like a normal artwork, and he drew an X with black painting on them, and the performance was called something like "You cannot live from art" or something similar. That was a phrase that he was told before. This one is a collaborative performance from Patricia Orellana, and it is very related to the University of El Salvador and the modernist influence of the university. Uh, and this piece is called Yaoba C8, and the exhibition took the name of this piece. And it's a performance when they draw this still image, for an hour, but they are doing a new drawing every 2 minutes, I think, and they have to finish it and toss it, and it is commenting on the because that is pretty much what you do in some courses of the university. You have to they qualify how good you are able to imitate through
Like a
drawing,
yeah.
yeah, reality in a specific amount of time. um, and she's doing that for I think an hour or two.
Mhm,
And the other one, it's called Sin Título.
mhm.
That could be no title, and it is by artist Danny Ruiz, and he does not have a university degree in arts, so he drew one for himself, which I think it's a very interesting gesture. And the next one, um, this project, I think it was related to the other thing that we were going to
Oh,
speak after
okay.
this. Yeah. So
Okay, great.
if you want to make the question first.
Yes, of course. Um, so we were talking a little bit also, and I felt it was interesting also to see somehow the people you invited. Sorry, I'm taking a step back before you were showing an
Yeah.
image of the panel, but again, it was very interesting to see. You mentioned Pablo Jose Ramirez, so from Guatemala, and again, Jocelyn Pinto, also active in Guatemala, Pablo now at Tate. So really an internet, again, very strong regional connections to really create a larger conversation that just goes beyond El Salvador. And I remember very clearly that my very first exhibition of Salvadoran art was actually curated by Jocelyn in 2018 in Guatemala City. It was a show of video work by Crack Rodriguez. So it was very interesting because, again, it was an opportunity to see Salvadoran art in a context that was not El Salvador, and really articulate, through these regional connections, also a broader understanding of where these practices sit, not just on a nation state context, which has its limitations, of course, although, as you were saying, the history of El Salvador is charged with a lot of different things, but also to see how this speaks to a broader set of connections. So, and this is where we were getting somehow, for our next question. So to understand not only, so we were talking about specificities of El Salvador, so this very traditional modernist education, or artists that have to do, of course, other jobs because the economic infrastructure is different, or curators who cannot just curate, or that is at least is not the understanding, which I also find to be very interesting, because different practices that coexist in a person can inform one another in interesting ways. But anyway, to somehow, so working within El Salvador to create different forms of professionalization for these practices, but also, as we were saying, working outside El Salvador. You showed us the art trips, so bringing foreign professionals with an interest in El Salvador to come do studio visits, really spend time immersing themselves in understanding what the local context is about. So I wanted to ask you about these international connections, how you work to strengthen them, to strengthen the regional connections, and also what are the challenges you encounter in this type of work. Prior to the talk, we were talking about the fact that not necessarily a lot of even art professionals outside of Central America or outside of specific regional interests know very much about art from El Salvador, contemporary art from El Salvador. So I assume there are also some challenges about culture and logistics and many other things. So if you can also guide us through a little bit those elements that I'm sure are part of the work that you have to develop as part of Y.ES. I'm going to pull up the images again, where we left it, and but just feel free to go ahead.
Okay, thanks.
There we go.
So I'm going to speak about other stuff, and then going to talk about this image that is
Yeah.
part of an exhibition. But related to your question, I think, like I said, the collaborations and connections with people from other parts of the world uh, are very important for Yes, and for Yes vision. And I think uh, it's it's good because it complements what's already happening here.
Mhm.
And I also wanted to mention another program that it's an online program. It was online when it started, so it's an online studio visit. What we do is connect a curator or professional with an artist. We send them the information about Salvadorian artists, and they select an artist they are interested in, and they get to talk with them. We arrange a call, and they speak for 45 minutes, and that has also led to a lot of projects. And it is a very easy program to do, actually. You just have to connect people, and I think overall that's the important thing about Yes, that it connects people.
Mhm.
And the art trips also do that, but in a very in a deeper way. And also we launched 2 years ago, I think, an art loan program. And Yes, it's a non-collective, but uh, we work a lot with Mario Cader collection. That it is a personal collection, but in that moment, he decided to make that available for loans. And this has been a very successful program. And two exhibitions came out of it. And one of those was Borders of Freedom that I created. And we presented that first here in El Salvador in the Cultural Center of Spain in September last year during our art trip. So the guests were able to see the exhibition. It is a video exhibition, and most of the videos are part of the loan program. And I decided to make it a video exhibition because it's something very easy to loan. Because a physical work needs to have you need to arrange transport and other stuff that is not too hard to make with video. So um, this was later presented in Locus projects in Miami and in a university in Madrid this year. And it is scheduled to be presented in Los Angeles Contemporary exhibitions at the end of the year. But we're going to see what happens because with the current state of things, uh, I hope we are going to be able to present it. And I would also like to talk a bit about the artists from the exhibition because in the artwork because it's very for me it's very interesting
Yes.
work. And the title Borders of Freedom or the whole exhibition addresses how what the artists identify as constraints for their own freedom, and it talks in a personal level but also in a political or more broader meaning of freedom. So this first video is from Zaire Quevedo,
Mhm.
and it is just that image, a window, and all you hear is a conversation between him and an ex-lover. And he works a lot with mixing art and documentary. So this was a real conversation, but it is I think it's a very beautiful piece because it talks about freedom in a very personal level. El Salvador is a very it has a very political art, and for me, it's very interesting to see another take on freedom that talks about personal relations. The next one,
Yes. Here
thanks. It's from Freddy Solan, and this was a video of a performance he did in a march in San Salvador. Uh, and they built a wall with the help of these organizations and workers, they built a wall that they after they tore it down. And obviously, this image talks a lot about for itself. This was made in the Workers' Day and the marches related to the Workers' Day. And talks about the problem of work in El Salvador and also about migration.
Mhm.
The next one, please.
Yes. And while we change, I'll remind those who didn't catch it at the beginning, you mentioned something that I find very important and interesting to always keep in mind. You were mentioning then what that 1/4 of the population has left El Salvador for either political or financial or work reasons, whatever that may be. So it's really a country that where this question of work and migration and movement and labor are kind of very, felt, I assume.
Yeah, yeah.
Very interesting. Here we go.
This was a performance by Alexi Miranda. Um, and what she does here is collects onion scraps, like the
Like
what?
leftovers.
Yeah, uh-huh. But she's peeling the onions. And this is like a ritual to self-healing. She later dives into the this lake and merges with the lake itself. And it this is pretty much a healing ritual and very intimate, very personal. And like I said, I included this work because I was interested also in that uh, part of freedom, or that concept of freedom that comes from within. And the next one, please. That is also a video performance from Crack Rodriguez. Uh, and in this performance, he uses three documents very important for El Salvador: the Constitution, the National Constitution, the peace agreements signed in 1992, and the Bible. So those El Salvador is also a country with where most of the population is Catholic. So what he does here is he washes them with a water truck and with that hose, and he's trying. It's like a gesture of trying to clean these documents that they have had a lot of power in El Salvador politics and society. And he does this in a street named after Monsignor Romero, who was a priest that was assassinated in the 80s, and uh, his death led to was one of the important moments of the war, and you could argue that it worsened the war because it was at the beginning of the 80s. And the next one, this is also video performance by Guadalupe Moravia. He is an artist, a Salvadorian artist based in the States, and he was an undocumented immigrant child. And this is a part. This is called OG of the Undocumented Children. And in this performance, he talks about his own history and mythology that he created. And in this specific performance, he describes uh, his process to go to the United States. And at the end, this is just a part of it,
Mhm.
the part of the video, but at the end, he enters a cage and tells his own story. And this specific part, I was interested in including it because the character you're seeing right now is called La Momia. And it was inspired by a character from a kids show that was very popular in the 80s.
Mhm.
And the song that La Momia, the character, has, talks about protecting the children. So he took that part and talks about protecting the immigrant children, which I think it's very beautiful. And the next one,
Yeah.
uh,
And I will just take the
Yeah.
opportunity, since you mentioned Guadalupe, because again, some of the people who are watching this are based in the United States. In any case, there's quite a strong root in the United States for the Call for Curators platform. And for those who might not know, Guadalupe Moravia has been developing a very important project over the last few months. It's the COVID outbreak started to fundraise for undocumented families based in New York. So I encourage whoever might be interested in learning or maybe considering donating to just visit his Instagram, Guadalupe Moravia, once again, and just read about the amazing work that he has been developing throughout these months, and perhaps considering helping a little bit where it is most needed. So sorry to jump in with this, but
Yeah.
it's a very important project.
Yeah. No, actually, I wanted to talk about that at some point as well.
We will.
Yeah. But yeah, he has this amazing project where he's helping undocumented families in the States. So, and his work is also amazing. So, and the last one is work by Abigail Reyes. It's called Si Senor, and she extracted parts of telenovelas, soap operas, where the female characters are saying the words "Yes, sir," and it's always to a boss or to a male, and there's always like that subaltern kind of feeling because here it's a way to directly see how gender is addressed in TV. And these are mostly old soap operas, kind of, not too old, but it is a very strong piece because it can be funny, but it can be very distressful as well when you notice that it's just 5 minutes. It's 5 minutes of characters saying "Yes, sir," and you think how often does that happen? How often does the woman appears in that position? And her practice as well is very interesting. She was a secretary. She worked as a secretary, and she addresses that a lot in her work. So this was basically the whole take or the exhibition. And as you can see, there are many. The artists are addressing many problems that they identify uh, as limits for their own freedom, and some of them propose solutions to it. And one example, as you said, is Guadalupe Maravilla, who talks about migration, but he's also doing things to help other people or to provide a solution for the problem.
Wonderful. Did you want to show any more images from this, Patricio, or
I don't remember where
let's
which are the last. Yeah. So we started talking about international strategies. So
yeah.
this was the first exhibition for from the long program. This was curated by Claire Bruckel,
Mhm.
and it was called Black Mirror. It was presented in Florida Atlantic University. And I included this because it was also a very big exhibition, and the first one from Y.ES from the Art Loan program that presented Salvadorian artists in the United States. But after that, a lot of exhibitions happened, not organized by Y.ES, not curated by Y.ES, but that included Salvadorian artists through the program.
Wonderful. I'm going to stop sharing. So this was the second image that we were showing of the same exhibition that you were talking about. And I also wanted to mention briefly, because you mentioned so much about how a lot of the work is online, and that you mentioned the beautiful initiative of the studio visits online, which you, as you said, you've been doing for a very long time. I also want to mention that for whoever's been watching, I encourage everybody to have a look at the website, which I'm going to share once again, because you have a lot of the names and a lot of resources. Like, you've also been trying to use the website as a way to create a network, which I think it's very interesting, so that not only inside the country or from a regional perspective, but also for whoever might be somewhat interested or curious to learn more about what is going on, through the website of Y.ES Contemporary. There is at least access to some of this information, which I think has been very interesting for me to get to know more besides the artists that I already knew, and to kind of understand how you can work in multiple ways, just by putting information out there, and trying to engage through using really the website as a platform rather than just a repository of information, which I think was very important. So you were talking a little bit about the COVID emergency. So if you want, we can touch very briefly upon, because we are almost done with our time. This goes by very fast. We'll speed up, but we're reaching the end slowly but surely. So if we want to talk for a moment about COVID, you were talking before about the fact that the situation has shifted quite a lot in El Salvador, but I know that also we were talking before about the initiatives that Y.ES has been undertaking in this direction. So if you want to guide us through that for a moment.
Yeah, so we noticed that, and we expected that this would affect a lot of artists, and there were also rains here during that. I think like a month or two ago, that also affected the people. And what we did was launch emergency grant, and we ended up giving 4 emergency grants. It is obviously something limited because a lot of people needed help, but we were able to help them that way. And we will also be supporting Teoréticas. That's an institution from Costa Rica, and they have created a Central American fund. So we will be supporting that as well. And that's a very good project as well, because it is focused in vulnerable communities, all people affected. And I think mostly the spaces have been affected as well. The museum had to close their agenda for the year, but I'm also very happy to see other people creating and keep working. One example is Guadalupe, and I wanted to talk as well about Beatriz Cortez, a very important artist based in Los Angeles. She was working, and she presented. She was part of a project with that gathered 80 artists to protest about incarceration culture and migrant detention centers in the U.S. It was called In Plain Sight. So she, you can search that's online. They have an Instagram account, and you can find a lot of online. But I think it was a very powerful project, and that happened in the 4th of July, mainly to protest also about the idea of the United States as a nation. But I think it's been challenging, but people is getting through, and we happily we were able to help only a bit, but
Wonderful. So then I encourage everybody who has questions for Patricio just to start typing them down and sharing them. And if not, I'll go on with my own questions, because I would have plenty and we could go on for a very long time. But we're about to wrap up. The thing that I wanted to ask you that you somehow addressed is the transformation that you have seen in the contemporary art scene in El Salvador. Of course, as you said, COVID is a curveball, and we will see what the long-term impact is, which of course will be strong, like in other countries, but each country with its own specificities. But generally speaking, I wanted to ask you about how you have seen the scene in El Salvador change over this last 5 years, since also Y.ES Contemporary started, or since you started working in the field. So if you could talk to us a little bit about new projects or interesting things that it might be worth knowing about that have been coming up. And also I wanted to ask you about collaboration which I assume it's an important element, especially when you work in a scene in a country that is much smaller than, say, the United States, which you just mentioned. So it's a smaller country, it's a smaller scene, and I wanted to know how people have been organizing and collaborating to find strategies for sustainability, to kind of join forces and come together and make things happen, despite the fact that the infrastructure might not be there, or the financial means, as we are used to think about when we talk again about the United States or other countries, might not necessarily be there. So how things have changed, but also what people have done in terms of strategies, tools, way to think, way to come together in order to somehow be proactive and work toward it. And I guess, I don't know if it's also a generational shift or change. These are open questions for you, but just to understand how things are moving and changing, and how this is taking place in El Salvador.
Yeah, I think although this has affected a lot of artists, um, also a lot of artists were already used to thrive in challenging conditions,
Yes.
and that has helped somehow. And I would think collaboration has been the key all along, because we have seen projects that have been sustainable, kind of sustainable, not so much from a economic perspective, or like a profit perspective, but they work in a collaborative economy, or an economy of friendship that is based on that, on collaborations. One example is La Resi, that started as a part of as a project, part of, or related somehow to the cultural center of Spain, but then it became its own thing, and now it's they are different things. And La Resi gathers. It was an artist residency, but they have had a very important agenda of events, and it is also not very institutional place, not a very institutional place, which is, I think it's also great, because very a lot of artists, a lot of young artists, or artists that might not have the opportunity to show in the museum, for example, are able to present their work at La Resi.
Mhm.
And it's been challenging for them as well in these days, but they are getting back to an agenda, and they are finding ways to keep the project alive. And the same goes to another project called La Fábrica. This is mostly an artist studio, but a lot of artists gather there and work there, and they have presented exhibitions there as well. And it is all independent, and I think that kind of collaboration, it's also uh, it appears again in that project. You can see that again, and I think that has been helpful in these times, that most of the people is willing to collaborate. Another example as well, I talked about her a few moments ago, but Dalia Chavez, she is mostly working with art education, and this is so important because, like I said, the only university that exists here, uh, it has been very criticized, and Dalia has been developing a lot of educational projects in collaboration with other institutions such as the university itself, the Art Museum of El Salvador, and the Cultural Center of Spain in El Salvador. Uh, and I think that her work is very important. Um, and all of it has been through collaborations. So that is something that uh, I'm definitely highlighting here.
That's great. And I just want to remind everybody that these projects that you're mentioning, as usual, we have them gathered on the page of the talk. So here's the, excuse me, the URL for people who want to have a look and visit, and they will be able to see the links of these other projects. As I always say, for us, it's very important to get to know the specificities of a project, its place, the context, but also through these talks to amplify the works of others. So Patricio, thank you also for mentioning all these amazing artists. I encourage everybody to either look at our page or again to go to Y.ES Contemporary for the specific artists you talked about, so that it's possible for people to somehow get to know more, for those who might not be. And there's a lot of messages that are coming in. They're not specific questions, but people that are very enthusiastic, and some people who are commenting that they would like to get in touch and collaborate. I'll pass all these messages on.
Sure.
But we've hit the hour. What I would say is that unless Patricia, you want to share any other last thoughts, which you're super welcome to do, but after this, we will wrap the conversation up.
No, I'd be happy to connect with all that people, and you can find an email on Jess website, but we can share my Jess as well. Yeah.
What I suggest always, because we're happy to also be a connector, like it's part of what we see as our service somewhat, is to shoot us an email to talks@callforcurators.com for feedback and any questions, but also to connect with Patricio, and we would be super happy to pass it on and to see these connections thrive across different contexts, both geographically and culturally. So this is absolutely wonderful. So Patricio, endless thanks to you, to your generosity, to your time. I also want to thank everybody who connected and stayed with us. Thank you for following us and for your patience. And I remind everybody that we are back. We will be back next Tuesday, same time, with a new project and speaker, which we will announce later in this week. So stay tuned or subscribe to the newsletter. And once again, I'm going to share for everybody the page with the resources that Patricio shared with us, and also to subscribe to the newsletter and learn more about what we're working on for the next weeks. So Patricio, thank you again, and hopefully until soon.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thanks to all the people that joined us. It was a very interesting talk, and I hope you take something away from it.
Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Bye.